after not seeing him for a while. Mark handed me a divorce lawyer's business card without asking how I was feeling or checking on me. Divorce sounds good. I'll take $1,200 a month for alimony, okay? Take care. He laughed as he said this, and beside him, Lily was smiling smugly, her arm around his. Fine, let's divorce, I replied casually, surprising Mark for a moment. But he quickly exchanged smiles with Lily. I had always known Mark wasn't the sharpest, which made my revenge plan easier to carry out. Once the divorce papers were signed, I decided it was time for my revenge. I was going to make them regret everything. My name is Jessica Hart, a 47-year-old illustrator and children's book author. I've always loved drawing. I have 2 childhood friends, Mark and Lily. They mean a lot to me, and Mark is my husband. It all started when Mark asked me out after high school when I was about to go to a different college. I was surprised, I'd always thought he was into Lily, but I couldn't say no to Mark, whom I secretly liked. After thinking it over and discussing with Lily, I accepted his proposal. Emily's behavior had always been a bit concerning since we were teens, but she was still my dear friend. Lily had a tendency to take other people's boyfriends and break their hearts once they got too obsessed with her, causing problems over the years. Her parents were worried, so Mark and I often spent time with her to keep an eye on her. Mark and I got married when we were both 25. 4 years later, Lily introduced us to her fiancé, Alex. He worked for a prestigious company. Nice to meet you, Jessica and Mark. I've heard a lot about you. And I'm looking forward to the future, he said politely. We all got along and spent holidays together, taking trips and enjoying some drinks. However, things started to change after Lily got pregnant 2 years into her marriage. Mark and I had a large family already, so we weren't interested in having children. We loved kids but didn't want the responsibility. We enjoyed our freedom to travel and drink, and we found it heartwarming to see families with children, but that was all. But when Lily announced her pregnancy, Mark's attitude started to shift. He quit smoking because Lily couldn't stand the smell and even started taking time off work to accompany her to doctor's appointments. I warned him that Alex might not appreciate him spending so much time with Lily, but Mark argued back. She's our childhood friend. She's reaching out for help, and you're heartless for not supporting her. I've been buying things and helping, but going with her to the doctor is crossing the line, I said. Mark frowned and snapped, you're just jealous because Emily needs me. She's anxious about the checkup. I can't just let her go alone. If you go with her every time, it's like you're the father of her baby, Mark. I retorted. Mark didn't take me seriously and started growing more distant. We argued more often as time passed, especially after Lily gave birth. But things really escalated when Lily's daughter, Emma, turned 6. You're never going to get pregnant anyway, so what's the problem? He said dismissively, brushing aside my concerns. Instead of listening, he snapped that I was being annoying. We'd barely had any arguments in our marriage. But things started to change once Lily got pregnant. Our arguments grew more frequent, and even after Lily gave birth, they didn't stop. In fact, Mark began spending even more time with Lily and their son, Ryan. But when Ryan was 7, an incident occurred that changed everything. It happened the day before Ryan's graduation. Mark was rummaging through the closet, pulling out clothes in a hurry. Mark, what are you doing? You've got a meeting tomorrow, I asked, a little confused. Mark's work had a relaxed dress code, but clients required a more professional look, so he always kept a few suits ready. But now they were scattered across the bed. No, I'm just figuring out what to wear for the ceremony, he muttered. What? You're seriously thinking about going to the graduation? I asked, incredulous. Lily asked me, but George can't make it, he said, barely looking at me. That's ridiculous, I blurted out. You're going to attend a graduation ceremony for a kid that's not even yours? Mark's face hardened. I knew he occasionally picked Ryan up from school. And I'd done so too, but this felt extreme. There was no reason for him to go to an event that was for parents. Are you still doubting me and Lily? I'm really disappointed in you. You can't even help out once in a while? Mark snapped. I tried to stay calm. That's not the point, Mark. This is about boundaries. Anyway, I'm going, and I need you to iron a shirt properly for me, he said, cutting off the conversation abruptly. He left for the bedroom, leaving me standing there stunned. I didn't have much of a choice but to call Lily. Hey, Lily, about tomorrow. I started. Oh, you're going to be borrowing Mark? Lily interrupted. But won't George mind about the ceremony? Wait, what? You haven't told George? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Obviously not. I'll tell him after the ceremony. It's no big deal, she responded nonchalantly. I was shocked. Lily hadn't even informed George about the graduation schedule? Mark had been acting as though he were Ryan's father at school. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. Emily, this is incredibly disrespectful to George, don't you see that? Why are you getting so worked up? You're scaring me. I'll see you tomorrow. Lily hung up before I could say anything else. My anger was boiling. But I swallowed it down and ironed Mark's shirt for the next day. The morning came, and I saw him off to Ryan's graduation ceremony. After that, Mark and Lily started hanging out even more. What started as once a month turned into once a week. And then it was 3 times a week. George, of course, started to get suspicious. One evening, while Mark and Lily were out, he showed up at our house. "I'm sorry to come by so late," George said, looking troubled. "There's something I need to ask you." "Is this about them?" I asked, knowing what was coming. George nodded and pulled out his phone. "I need you to see this." He showed me the GPS history from Lily's car, revealing she'd been at a hotel 3 times a week. Every time she was with Mark. I didn't need any more confirmation. I could see the betrayal in George's eyes. "What are you planning to do?" I asked quietly. "I want to make them pay," he replied. "I can't just let them get away with this." I felt the same fury inside me. Me too. They've betrayed us both. We started scheming, planning our revenge in secret. First, I focused on rebuilding my income. Over the years, I'd been saving money by doing housework and taking care of Ryan. But my income had dwindled. George switched to working from home. And whenever Mark and Lily went out, he'd bring Ryan to my house, where we'd take care of him together. They had no idea we were onto them. We kept gathering evidence, careful not to let on that we knew about their affair. Eventually, we had everything we needed to take our revenge. But just as we were about to execute our plan, we uncovered something even more shocking about Ryan. George and I struggled with the decision, but we both agreed that we didn't want to hurt young Ryan. So, we decided to wait until he was an adult before taking our revenge. Despite our decision to endure for 10 more years, I was struck by a serious illness that required long-term hospitalization. At best, I'd be discharged in at least 2 years. Though I could still work from my hospital room, it was certain that my workload would have to be reduced. After informing George about the situation, I consulted Mark. However, Mark's reaction was no different from when we were making small talk. "I'll visit you once in a while," he said with little concern. It felt as though Mark no longer had any affection for me. He didn't even ask about my condition or the name of my disease. In reality, Mark only visited me once a month, sometimes even less. After Ryan's 15th birthday, things took an odd turn. While Ryan used to visit me almost every day after I was hospitalized, he began to distance himself. Neither George nor I could figure out why. And when we asked him, he just said, "Don't worry about it." We eventually found out the reason from Mark, who rarely visited. One day, after not seeing him for a month, Mark barged into my room without knocking, looking completely different in his flashy attire. "Hey, it's been a while," he greeted, tossing a divorce lawyer's business card at me. "No, how are you feeling? Or, are you okay?" Just coldly, "I'm divorcing you. You don't work, so pay me $1,200 a month as alimony. That's the deal. Take care." He grinned, clearly enjoying the moment. Beside him, Lily was wrapped in his arms, wearing the same smug expression. I couldn't believe my eyes. I just nodded and casually said, "Fine, let's divorce then." Mark seemed taken aback for a second, but quickly exchanged smiles with Lily. It was clear that Mark wasn't the type to think deeply, which worked perfectly in my favor. Once I received the notification that the divorce was finalized, I set my revenge plan into motion. I vowed to make them cry as a celebration of my recovery. I moved swiftly. First, I contacted George to arrange a transfer to a new hospital. I also informed my lawyer that they would now mediate between the two parties. George also began acting, moving closer to my new hospital with Ryan and visiting me frequently. Ryan still had a gloomy expression, but I was happy he came to see me every day. Most of my belongings were already in my hospital room, so I told Mark to dispose of everything left behind. I didn't want anything that had been touched by them in my new life. Once the hospital transfer and George and Ryan's move were complete, I received a call from Mark. I had only stepped out of my room for a few minutes, but when I checked my phone, I had 30 missed calls. Feeling exasperated, I answered. "Hello?" I said. "What the hell is going on?" Mark's panicked voice came through, with the voice of a real estate agent and Emily yelling in the background, making my stomach turn. "What do you mean, what's going on?" Mark shouted. "Why do we have to move out?" I responded coolly, "Because that's my house." Mark seemed completely thrown off by this. The truth was, the house we lived in wasn't his. It was a space I rented when I first started my career as a freelancer. Back then, I didn't have enough income to maintain 2 homes. And Mark couldn't afford to live alone, so he moved into my place. Therefore, Mark had never actually paid rent or utility bills for that place, though he gave me a little money for living expenses. However, that amount didn't even cover the rent. The situation grew worse when the room was cancelled. It was too far from my new hospital, and I had processed the cancellation the day after submitting the divorce papers. I hadn't informed him directly because the real estate agent, who knew the situation, promised they would contact him. Now, George and Ryan had suddenly disappeared, and the house had been sold. "What are we going to do about our new house?" Mark shouted. "I don't know, maybe stay in a business hotel for now," I said, turning on the speakerphone and continuing to work. Mark's frustrated voice came through loud and clear, "Don't screw with me." He seemed to remember something, and his tone softened. "Well, whatever. When will you transfer the money? We're running low on cash." "What are you talking about?" I responded, trying to stay calm. He snapped back, "Huh? Don't mess around. I told you to pay $11,000, didn't I?" I shrugged, I don't recall agreeing to that. My response was met with incoherent yelling from Mark on the other end of the line. He seemed to think he could get money from me and had been spending it recklessly. Even if he had $11,000 left, I wondered how he expected to get by for the rest of the month. "Hey, don't just stay silent. Say something," Mark barked. "There's really nothing to talk about," I replied coldly. My retort left Mark momentarily stunned, but he quickly regained his composure, growing even more irritated. I added, with as much cheer as I could muster, "Anyway, we're basically strangers now, so please don't contact me anymore. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." "Lawyer? Hey, wait a minute," Mark shouted, but I hung up before he could finish. He tried calling back several times, but I ignored it, and eventually, the call stopped. Despite his anger at my refusal to answer, Mark began avoiding calls from my lawyer, proving that his childishness knew no bounds. I couldn't believe the trouble he was causing, even after everything that had happened. A few months later, after a temporary discharge from the hospital, I decided to visit Mark's parents. As I stood in front of their door, I found Mark and Lily both looking small and trembling, like children caught doing something wrong. "You tell them, Mark. That's a low blow," Mark's father muttered, glaring at him. I simply responded, "I just reported that we got divorced." Mark glared at me, his face flushed with anger, but he shrank back when his father shot him a stern look. I had always had a good relationship with my in-laws, even dining with them when Mark wasn't around. Despite our closeness, I felt it was important to share the truth of our divorce, so I visited them to tell them directly. "Is it true that you're remarrying, Lily?" I asked. "Yes, it's true. Lily, Ryan, and I are starting over as a family," she said with a confident smile. "What are you talking about? Your only family is me," Mark spat. His father frowned, clearly disapproving of Mark's words, and shot him a look that seemed to say, "Give me a break." Mark shook his head, clearly frustrated, and handed me a piece of paper. "What's this?" I asked. "It's the bill from the hotel we stayed at," Mark said, acting like it was obvious. He pointed at the bill on the table, then suddenly collapsed into a dramatic fit. "What the heck, Mom? I didn't raise you to be like this." My mother-in-law gasped, struggling to breathe as she looked at Mark in disbelief. Lily, too, wore an expression of shock. "Why are you so angry?" "It's just that the family is changing because I'm getting married. Plus, you'll have a grandchild, your real grandchild. Aren't you happy?" Mark said, his voice full of smugness. My mother-in-law, clearly overwhelmed by the situation, turned to me, her eyes filled with confusion. Both of my in-laws had always known I didn't want children, and they treated me like their own daughter, while also showing Lily, my childhood friend, similar kindness. But there had always been a boundary between a daughter-in-law and a friend. I could tell my mother-in-law wouldn't be happy about this situation, and Lily should have known better, too. "But Emma's your grandchild, right?" Mark continued, as though trying to justify everything. "It's your grandchild, half his blood too. Aren't you happy?" Lily remained unfazed, showing no sign of remorse, and acting as if she didn't understand the problem at all. Her attitude sent a chill down my spine. At that moment, someone who had been silent until now spoke up. "Enough already? It's disgusting," Emma said, looking up from her smartphone in the corner of the room. The room went silent, and Emma's voice cut through the tension. "My dad is the only father I've ever had, whether we're related by blood or not. He's the only father I've known." She glanced at Mark and Lily before continuing, her tone hardening. "I heard everything from Dad, how he was always kept in the dark about my events. You two kept the dates from him, and eventually, you even stopped telling him about them at all. But Dad always said I was his daughter. So I am his daughter, and I will never be yours." Emma's words stung, and as she finished, she sat beside me, her tone softening. "You know, when I found out about this, I thought you'd hate me. But Dad said that wasn't the case, so I came here today. Emma looked up at me, her eyes filled with emotion. I love you so much. You were always so kind to visit me every day when I was in the hospital. I was really happy to see you, Sarah. Emma's tears welled up, and she hugged me tightly. The weight of everything settling between us. The truth was undeniable, Emma might have been the child of Mark and Lily, born out of an affair, but she was still a child, one who had brought so much warmth and kindness into my life. I've taken care of her for 15 years. There's no way I don't have affection for her, I said calmly. By the way, Lily, weren't you curious why I wasn't surprised when I found out? Emma is Mark's daughter? Lily looked startled, about to respond. But before she could speak, someone else entered the room. We knew from the start, 10 years ago, George suddenly appeared. His presence was understandable, considering Lily had recently unilaterally demanded a divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. I was taken aback when George mentioned the divorce. Oh, and unfortunately, you're not divorced yet. The papers are still here. Didn't you notice? I could hardly believe it. Of course, Lily and Mark had never been the type to confirm anything. But I was still stunned. Despite the 100-day waiting period for women to remarry, Lily had known about the situation for months. So, Lily is still my wife. And Emma is still my daughter, I said, trying to process the situation. Well, since there won't be a wife, Lily cut me off. Wait, what do you mean? A 15-year-old can't choose their parent. That's not true, I said, trying to stay calm as Emma held my hand. A clear signal of her choice. Lily stared at Emma, shocked. Emma frowned at her, then turned to me. There was silence in the room before Mark burst into laughter. So that's what this is about. You two are together now, huh? Too bad, though. Isn't it impossible to live on George's salary alone? Mark asked, making assumptions. Can you stop making such weird assumptions? I shot back, feeling my patience wear thin. And by the way, it seems George earns double what you think. Don't you know that? Is that a bluff? Mark said, smirking. Besides, you can't work with your illness. You're just going to die miserable somewhere. I couldn't help but laugh at Mark's huge misunderstanding. Mark seemed even more frustrated at my reaction, and I couldn't help but tease him. You didn't know about my income, did you? Mark blinked in confusion. Huh? What do you mean? It's probably just a bit more than a part-time job. I shook my head. No, it's different. My annual income is $600,000. Mark's eyes widened in shock. Lily looked just as stunned. In fact, over the last 10 years, I've become a popular children's book author. My income skyrocketed from book sales, interviews, and other media. A film adaptation of my work is even planned. So, my income is soaring. Mark blinked rapidly, trying to process this information. Liar, he muttered. Want to see for yourself? I asked, pulling out my phone and showing them my bank account screen. A large amount of money was being deposited every month. Lily was left speechless. Jessica. Let's, make up, huh? Mark tried, but his words were empty. Are you serious? I replied flatly. If you want to get married, feel free, but I'll definitely be taking the compensation for damages. Sarah, wait. Mark shouted, but I ignored him. Grabbing Emma's hand, I turned and said goodbye to my in-laws. As I left their house, I thought about the aftermath. Mark had originally worked at my father-in-law's company, but it was soon revealed that he'd lied about going out for sales and was subsequently fired. My father-in-law had planned to force him onto a friend's fishing boat, intending to work him into the ground. The life on a fishing boat was no match for Mark's indoor lifestyle, and he contacted me several times, but I notified my father-in-law each time. Eventually, the call stopped. Lily, meanwhile, lost custody of Emma to George. Their divorce was final, and Lily, uninterested in Mark, who couldn't afford any luxuries, didn't seem to chase after him. She was disowned by her family and now lived alone in a rundown apartment, having never worked since becoming involved with Mark and raising their children. As for me, my picture books continued to sell well, and I was receiving more and more offers for adaptations into animation and merchandise. My health, though still fragile, was improving, and my doctor recently told me that I might be able to leave the hospital next year. One more thing, George and Emma came to visit me every day. In fact, George had recently confessed to me, with remarriage in mind. It was a turning point in my life, but for once, I felt hopeful about the future.